Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 55, recorded on July 17th, 2026. It'll be released on July 25th, 2026. The title of this episode is Why We Fail to Reproduce. It's a follow-up to the previous one, which was Failure to Reproduce, about how most of the world's countries have forgotten how to reproduce. They have Most of the world's countries have ever decreasing birth rates, so that there will be less people in the next generation than in the previous generation. They seem to be unable to, or we seem to be unable to reverse that trend. Many of the world's countries have already reached a birth rate of 1.0 or are close to that, which means that each generation will have one half the number of children as the previous generation. And South Korea, where I live, is the leader in this race to extinction. Its birth rate right now is 0.75, which means about 3 times as many children, as many people in the previous generation as in the next generation, or each generation has 1/3 the number of children as the previous. So many countries have tried to reverse this, and so far none have succeeded, and they're just moving more and more quickly to their end, the end of the country. Obviously, if there are no more Koreans, then the peninsula still exists, but the people aren't here. Somebody else will be here undoubtedly. There are only 2 exceptions worldwide to this trend. One is the stans, 7 countries that end with stan, Pakistan being the most populous of them, between India and Russia and Iran, and also there are also some other countries in the Middle East that have lower birth rates but still above replacement, but they seem somehow related to the stans. But more importantly, the most important exception, more important than the stans by far, is Africa. If you leave out the northern countries near the Mediterranean and the countries near the southern tip of India, there's 1 billion people there, and they're doubling their population in each generation. If things keep going along these trends, unless the countries that have low birth rates somehow figure out how to restore their birth rates and start having more children, then whatever Africa does, whether it eventually stops having children too, that'll happen a while from now, and Africa is set to be the last man standing in this world reproduction thing. In other words, however things go, it looks like in 50 to 100 years from now there will be as many Africans as everyone else put together, unless the other countries figure out how to reproduce. So that's what the previous episode was about, the numbers and the geographics and a bit of the history over the last 200 years of how this has unfolded. And this episode is about why we are failing to reproduce. But first, what kind of channel is this that you've shown up to? This is a prepping channel. It's for you and your family line, to prepare you to flourish and thrive and reproduce in the coming era. We're ending an era of about 250 years of doublings, in which the human race consumed just about twice as much of everything every 22 years. So each generation had about twice as much of everything as the previous generation. This is averaging across the world's population. It's of course some countries enjoyed even faster growth than that, while other countries enjoyed almost no growth at all for most of that time or all of that time. in the coming era, all that's ending. In the coming era, these doublings won't be happening anymore, and we'll have to get used to that, because right now we think if you're not expanding your economy or whatever, your wealth by percentage points every year, then you're failing. Somehow we'll have to get used to not having that kind of self-confirmation. And we're transitioning into an era where we'll have a bit less energy than we have now, a bit less resources than we have right now. Right now we consume about 60,000 calories per person per day, averaging across the globe, and it'll be about half that, around 30,000. And so if you want to know about our energy sources and how we can know that we're going to have less going forward, I suggest you go back to the first section of this channel, roughly episodes 10 through 38. We're now finishing the second section of this channel, which is about that transition from one era to the next. Starting in episode 39 and finishing in the next episode, 56, we've been discussing how to recognize the transition and where are we in it. So what is this transition like? How's it going to go, or how is it going? And in episode 53, so two episodes ago, I finally, after examining world events, the signs of the times, and all sorts of things about economies and science and technology and a million things, just looking the horse in its mouth in detail, finally came up with what's happening. We haven't run out of energy yet. It would take generations. Our main source of energy is coal, oil, and gas. That's 41,000 calories of energy. Another 15,000 calories comes from food, fodder, and wood, and another 5,000 or so come from the renewables and nuclear. And the thing about minerals, coal, oil, and gas is that they don't run out in a year or in 10 years. They just gradually become harder and harder to get, so you have to work harder for them, like any other mineral, and maybe you get lower quality stuff. But the time scale for that to happen, for us to run out of easy coal, oil, and gas, and begin having only less easy coal, oil, and gas, is in generations, 50 years, maybe 25 years to see a noticeable difference, 50 years to really feel the pinch and be at half of your original consumption of easy coal, oil, and gas. Okay, so and in any case, we could still we have enough coal in particular, and we have a lot of gas still. We still have enough that if we went for broke, we could, in theory, double our energy consumption one more time. Of course, if we did go for broke, then we would run out of the easy coal, oil, and gas faster, and we'd be into the next era sooner. But as it is, even though we haven't yet run out of the easy coal, oil, and gas, we're close. We've already gone through, I don't know, maybe we are already using around 1,000 times more than we did 250 years ago. We could still double one more time, so we're pretty close to the end of that. Even though we could double one more time, we're not done. Okay, we're practically speaking done. Why? And this is the message of episode 53, is that we're in a state of collapse. We've been carrying a heavier and heavier burden as these 250 years of doublings have gone on. And by now, the human race is no longer running like a teenager, sprinting down a track. Instead, it's staggering like an old man under this immense burden. And the burden that we've picked up has actually there are two ways of seeing the burden, or two kinds of burdens. One is a burden that is the consequences of living a life that we weren't built for originally. We and our ancestors, wherever you draw the line between our race and our ancestors, have been walking the face of this earth for 3 million years, and the way that we lived was as hunter-gatherers. We were erect, we were moving, and we were busy, and we were in some sense dominant. We engaged with everything. Life was very interesting, and we were strong until maybe some people died in their 30s or whatever, but in our youth we were strong. We were supermen compared to who we are now. Okay. Now we're living a life that we're not built for. Okay, and we've made many changes, changes that went and ever increasing, ever deeper changes away from that way of living, and we have not been at all careful about them. So that's the first burden. We're just living a life that we're not adapted to. And the second one is that we're experiencing a glut. We're over-consuming. We live in luxury, and that glut is eroding the human heart of individuals. It's eroding our societies and our families. So I've already told you about why we're collapsing, what the burden is. I should say a little bit more about the departure from hunters and gatherers. First, there was a relatively mild departure of moving into pasturing and farming. Then there was a second one that happened over the last 250 years, the move to coal, oil, and gas. At this point, we were indoors and began slouching or sitting in our cars and not moving, and all sorts of things, all sorts of transformations in our lifestyle. And then the third one is the move towards electricity and to digital technologies, which is still in progress. So I've told you about what the burden is, why the human race is collapsing. That was just a recap of episode 53. And this episode is about why we are failing to reproduce, okay? And in the end, I'm going to tell you that the reason why we fail to reproduce is that we're carrying the same burden that I just described to you, okay? And we're collapsing under it, okay? But before we get to that, I'm going to spend the bulk of this episode talking about all the individual causes, okay, of hundreds of immediate causes of our failure to reproduce. Okay. Before we get into that, and then after going over the hundreds, and I'm sure you could list thousands of reasons why we fail to reproduce, then I'll say, okay, well, but the basic one is that we have a burden and we're just collapsing under it. Okay, but I hope you'll humor me. I hope you'll learn something here. I hope you'll see there are so many causes, okay, but you'll see that there's something deeper to it, and you'll learn something. Okay, it's an important thing because this failure to reproduce will determine the course of the entire rest of humanity's history, and in particular, it will be key to what I'll be telling you about how to flourish and thrive and reproduce in the coming era. So, if this is key, what we're talking about here is key to prepping. So, but I'll say a few words about before we talk about all the immediate causes, or many of the immediate causes of our failure to reproduce. There are some things that we learned in the previous episode where I went over the numbers of our failure, our history, that are relevant. Okay. The first is that when you take a country that or a tribe or whatever that is living in the way the human race did until 250 years ago, and then that that country is supplied with a glut of food and basic adequate health care. I'm not talking about CT scans, I mean whatever it needs to just basically help a woman give birth safely and for children to grow up, and is free from any major wars, then the birth rate during those first decades or first couple of generations after this happens is 5 or 6 or 7 children per mother, okay, per woman. I know that because in 1970 most of the world's countries were at 7 or so, okay, 7 children per mother. The reason for that was that they'd been living in poverty. Only a few of the world's, only a fraction of the world's population up until 1970 was living in wealth, and in fact it's still that way. Okay, but what changed was that in the 50s and 60s there was a green revolution where we figured out how to grow a lot more crops using fertilizer and irrigation and a number of other technologies. So there was a glut of food worldwide after World War II, and also basic healthcare notions and antibiotics and so on had spread around the world, so that most of the world at this point had some access to basic healthcare. So under these conditions, most of the world, which had been living without a steady glut of food, and perhaps without adequate health care, even basic health care, suddenly was reproducing at 7 per mother. Now the rich countries had very high birth rates also, but earlier. Like in 1800, the United States had a birth rate of 7. At that time, I don't think the United States had fully jumped into the Industrial Revolution, but it had a glut of farmland, and it had a continent at its disposal, and it was expanding into that continent as quickly as it could. It was a powerful country already, and it had plenty, and it was enjoying it. So that was but by 1800, the United States and France had begun a trajectory towards not reproducing. So throughout the 1800s, their birth rates decreased and decreased and decreased. Eventually, England and Germany and Japan joined in. Okay, and by 1935, the world's rich countries, excepting the ones that were the oil countries in the Middle East, were near replacement rate. They were around close to 2 children per mother, per woman. After that, there was a baby boom. After 1945, there was a baby boom for 25 years, where the replacement, where the birth rate went up a little bit, maybe to 3 or so, and then it returned to its original trajectory by 1970. In the United States, it was back down to replacement rate. In 1980, it crossed over and was below replacement. It's been there since. So the countries that were poor in 1970, and almost all of them still are poor, they were around 7 in 1970, and since then they've divided their birth rates by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. China and South Korea, for instance, China divided by 5, South Korea so far by 7. Okay, so enormous changes in culture and in family, and for most of these countries that were poor, the drastic divisions in birth rate did little or nothing to increase their wealth. They're still poor. Okay, so that's review. And now this episode is about why. And as I've said, first I'm going to go through 100 immediate causes of why we're failing to reproduce. These are important because these are things that will all have to change sooner or later. for any person, family, or society that wants to have a future. Maybe there's some fine-tuning. You can use your judgment about which ones you can maybe permit to continue, or how much that you can permit them to continue. But a large subset of these, or most of these at least, are going to have to be thrown in the waste basket of history. Okay, but another part of the point here is that there are just too many. And when you see something that has 100 causes, you have to think there's something deeper. If you think it really does have 100 causes, you'll just be bewildered and confused. Okay, so the cause is, of course, the burden. I'll come back to that towards the end of the episode. So the first one is that we delay our courtship and our sex and our marriage. So it was that people become fertile in their teens, and it used to be that often people were married and having children by age 18, for women sometimes earlier. Maybe even, or perhaps 20, but 20 would be a little late. That's a natural timing if you regard the human body as your clock. Okay, but now people will get married and start having children, trying to have children in their 30s or in their 40s, or even later, or maybe just never. Okay, so the reasons why we delay. We have other priorities. Individuals and societies have other priorities, like school. We think that schooling is important, so that's a good reason to delay to 18 for high school, or to 22 for college, or even later. Or careers, or people have many, after they do finish college and are in the midst of a career or whatever, they have many other interests and activities that keep them busy and interested. You name it, thousands or tens of thousands of different things you can be interested in, and it can consume your time, and well worth it. You just somehow don't get around to thinking about you don't, maybe you kind of wish, but you don't get serious about having children. Okay. Some of the priorities may, of course, include romantic relationships, pursuing one or more romantic relationships, or sexual relationships, or just sexual acts with random strangers. There's also porn and masturbation. All of those can keep you not so interested in actually having the kind of sex and relationship that would result in children. Okay. And in the meantime, we may feel like we're just waiting for life and for the right man or the right woman to meet what we really want. And so we have a vision of, this is what I should have a job and I should have a home perhaps ready for my children, and then I can get married, and then we can start having children. Okay, and I've met many people who actually had that expectation, and families that first of all arrange the home and make sure that the child has a home ready and has a set job and a career, and then there'll be time to finally marry the girlfriend that they've had for 15 years and begin thinking about having children. Okay. It's just one, but there are many other kinds of expectations. It doesn't have to be a familial expectation. It can be your own personal things. Okay. So, and in general, we just pursue a lot of sexual relationships, often not marriage, but sometimes marriages without any commitment to having a family. We may enter marriages without really having a serious intention or commitment to having children. So there are all these delays, okay, and different reasons for them, okay. Another reason why we have less children is that divorce is now very common, and so as you're getting close to divorce and then in a divorce, of course, it's natural to stop having sex with your wife or your husband, and therefore to have no more children with them. Uh, and it may take you a while to line up another partner, and then you may have some doubts about whether you want to have children with them too. Okay, of course, this will restrict fertility. So let's go on. There's so many reasons. Okay, there are also many. We engage in a lot of sexual relationships and sexual activity that cannot be fertile. Okay. So I have nothing against people who find themselves attracted to the same sex, but the fact is that if you do engage in a relationship or in sexual acts with somebody of the same sex, you aren't going to have children. There's also a lot of people nowadays, in the last few years, who have become confused about what is a man and what is a woman and how reproduction works. Okay. And when you're confused about things like that, the likelihood is that you're less likely to have children. Okay. And then often these people receive surgeries or medications that decrease or end fertility, that mutilate them, and that have lifelong side effects. And these things also reduce fertility. Then another set of causes have to do with the fact that within marriages and within long-term unions, relationships between a man and a woman, so something that in theory could result in children, sex often becomes rare. Okay, and this is well documented. It can be a few times a month or a few times a year or never. Okay, and there are many reasons why sex might become rare. It might not be the highest priority in the couple's life. They may just feel too busy or too occupied with other things. They may feel like they need to schedule the sex before doing it, so they set an appointment. I think when you, I understand. I think many people do it. I just have to. I think people need to think a little bit about why they feel like they need to set an appointment before they. A man and a woman would have to set an appointment. A man and a wife would have to set an appointment before they could excuse themselves from the family for a sexual moment. Okay, but nonetheless, many do wait till all the children are in bed, whatever, or if they don't have children, I don't know why they're scheduling. But they do. And then also another reason for not having sex is that couples often develop a set of behaviors that cut off the possibility of sex. So power games and virtue signaling, unless you act right, or if you're on my bad side, I won't even think about sex. Okay, or if you're not interested, then I'll say, well, I don't need this anyway. We have other love languages, and I know, and I can be happy even if you're not nurturing me right now sexually. I'm a grown-up man, whatever, and so I don't need it. It can also happen that we begin to sleep separately in two different beds or in two different rooms for whatever reason, or that we can start welcoming children into our bed, even if we're sleeping together, which of course children in the bed makes it hard to be sexual. Okay, unless you relocate to some other room or whatever. Then there are relationship problems between the man and the woman, which often are not confronted, and that and these unconfronted problems create barriers between them and result in reduced sex. And then there are sexual problems like a lack of pleasure or desire. There could be impotence. There could be early ejaculation. And there's plenty of sex manuals and therapists who are willing for a fee to treat these, but the fact is that usually these sexual problems are rooted in relationship problems between the man and the woman. So even if you do find some fix, often you just don't find a fix, but even if you do find a fix, it doesn't really, you've just made a cosmetic change to in the actual quality of the relationship, and the actual frequency of sex doesn't change much. They're intractable. Okay. So all of these things have been discussed a lot. At any rate, the fact is that often within a couple years after a couple gets married, they start having sex quite rarely. Monthly or several times a month. And the other fact is that a woman is we have cycles of fertility, and a human woman, that's a woman has only between 2 and 4 days of peak fertility per month. Basically, the egg is produced once a month, and then it's just a day or two before it stops being fertile. Okay, and so it's only for a small window that the woman is fertile, and so if you don't make love frequently, you won't have children, because more than 9 times out of 10, 9 days out of 10, the woman is not fertile, or marginally so. It's actually very easy to figure out when the fertile days are, okay, for the woman, and even the man can get some sense of, even without the woman's help, of which days are the fertile days. But instead we disconnect from our bodies, and we remain unaware of fertility cycles. We don't teach our young women about how to tell when they're fertile and when they're not. And therefore, when a woman does get pregnant, she and her partner may experience that as a surprise, as being, quote, unplanned, unquote, and even as something that was beyond their power. It's an act of God, practically. Okay, like a tornado or an earthquake. Okay, so you could aim for the fertile days, and most of us just don't know how. We don't have that kind of knowledge of our bodies. Then there are a number of choices that we make to decrease fertility. There are sexual acts that we engage in that cannot produce pregnancy. Perhaps, and I think there's a lot of influence that comes through all sorts of channels to make these acts seem more exciting, more fulfilling, more pleasurable. So people think this one is a special one, and it's I want that, and about things that could not possibly result in pregnancy. And also another reason why we would engage in these acts is just if you want to enjoy sex without children. And along the same lines, we use artificial contraception. So these are technological means that we use to either create a situation where the woman doesn't produce eggs monthly, she's not producing eggs anymore, or to ensure that there's no contact between the egg and the sperm, or if the sperm actually does fertilize an egg, to ensure the death of the fertilized egg, the new human being, within some weeks afterwards. Okay. Now I should mention here that one way that you ensure the death of a fertilized egg is called an IUD. It's something that sits inside of the woman and scrapes the uterus clear, so that the egg can't implant on and start growing from the woman, start receiving nutrients from the woman, from the mother. But another way is that, in fact, the pill does not all the hormonal contraceptives. The pill does not always ensure that no eggs are produced. There are some, from time to time, eggs that are produced, and the pill makes sure that the woman's hormones are off enough that she is not a good home for the fertilized egg. Okay, and yet another way that we deliberately decrease fertility is we sterilize people, either women or men or both. Okay. I should make a few notes. I should say a couple more things about hormonal contraceptives, the pill. Okay. They were introduced around 1960, which is well after when the rich countries arrived at near replacement rate. Many of the world's richest countries were near replacement rate in the 30s. Okay, they'd come down from 5 or 6 or 7 wherever they were. Okay, so it's clear that the pill is not the only reason by far. It's just for our failure to reproduce. It's not the whole story. It's just one detail in the story. Okay. I've known people who claim that it's all because of the pill, and it's just wrong. And then a second one is that the pill often continues to decrease fertility very long after you stop taking it. So many women who have taken the pill and then went off and wanted to have the child had extraordinary problems or just failed to have children. Next one up, next reason for our failure to reproduce is abortion. Okay. For most of the human race's history, abortion has been considered a grave evil, murder. But it's sometime after the USSR and its associated, all of the countries there legalized it in 1955, or I think it was all of them, the Warsaw Pact. In the UK in 67, Canada in 69, the United States in 73. And I'm not going to go through all the other countries. There are some countries where it's still illegal, okay, but throughout the world's richest countries, and by now, you may think Muslims. I was surprised to find out that Muslim countries, actually many of them, have abortion. It's common throughout the world by now. Common that it would be legal. All of these came into play more or less around 1970 or so. So I mean, it spread across the world around then. Now, how many abortions so far? Well, if you look at some pro-abortion groups, there have been, if you take their numbers and you believe them, for how many abortions there have been year by year since 1980, there have been 1.7 billion abortions worldwide from 1980 to 2024, or about 40 million per year. 65 million abortions in the United States alone. Now these organizations are not entirely rigorous and trustworthy, and then so it's hard to be sure of the numbers, and also they leave out medications and contraceptives that cause early abortions, like IUDs, which I mentioned, and the pill sometimes does. Okay, so the number could be, in fact, of course they also leave out the morning after pill. If it's one that you take at home, so there's no way to track whether it's been used or not, or whether it had its desired effect, whether it actually killed somebody or not. 40 million abortions per year on average from 1980 to 2024. So that means about 0.4 abortions per living woman. But in some countries it may be considerably higher. It could be 3 or 4 abortions per living woman in Korea, in South Korea, or in Japan. I'm not sure, but it's certainly a lot higher than than 0.4. Many women use it as their primary form of birth control. But worldwide average is 0.4. Now, between 1970, the worldwide average birth rate was 4.83 children per woman, and now it's 2.35, so it's a drop of around 2.5 children per woman over those 50 years, and in the meantime, there is 0.4 abortions per woman. So, the 0.4 is only a fraction of the total decrease in fertility. Okay. Like contraception, like sterilization, abortion is only part of the story of why we're not reproducing. Okay, it's an important part, but it's only part. Okay? It's only a fraction. It's not even half. It's more like a fifth or a sixth of the story. There's also pressure to not have children. So if there are parents walking around through a town or a shopping mall or in any setting with 5, 6, 7 children, you can imagine the rolled eyes, the contempt and insults that they may receive. Okay. There's also, if there's an organization that promotes, say a church that promotes, or any other organization that promotes having a lot of children, you can imagine the ostracism and the contempt that it receives from the press and from many other people and organizations. Okay. There's pressure against nations, so that if a nation refuses to legalize abortion, or for instance, doesn't toe the line on homosexuality or whatever, then it may be downgraded from. Tourist advisories may be downgraded from you're good to go to this is a dangerous country, don't go. Okay, or they may not receive funding, or not be favored at treaties, at conferences, and not get to participate in treaties, and so on, not be allowed to trade. Okay. And then we also have a way of, and this is very common in the press, and of blaming environmental problems and climate problems on overpopulation, or in particular on Africa. Okay, and the fact is, I've already discussed this in other episodes, this is ridiculous. The fact is that the world's rich countries consume far more than the world's poor countries. The impact and the impact on the environment, and the impact on the climate of it comes almost entirely from the world's rich countries, and certainly not from Africa. And the fact is that we consume per person something like 100 times more than we did 250 years ago. So if we had grown our population to its current level, and we had just not grown our consumption by a factor of 100, maybe grown it only by 50 or by 20, we would be in a far different place environmentally and climate-wise. Okay. I want to mention that there's a lot of discussion and research and policy actions to identify second and third and fourth, quote, causes of human decisions, like, and to try to change them. So like maybe people aren't having children because they don't have enough economic security, or maybe they don't have guaranteed housing or good schools, or maybe the paternity leave and maternity leave aren't long enough, or maybe women's status is not high enough. Okay, and so countries have tried to, and many scientists and researchers have tried to analyze these things, and there have been policy changes in many countries intended to encourage people to have more children. So one point here is just that it's very difficult, and indeed I think it's a questionable step to try to discern laws or that govern human, quote, decisions, unquote, as if people's decisions to have children or to commit crime, for instance, were controllable using some external influence in the same way that you can force water to boil by heating it up high enough. Okay, um, there's a anyway, whether you can discern these sorts of relations and causal effects on human behavior and on societal behavior, it's very difficult to do, whether or not it's possible. Okay, and in the long story short, despite lots of countries trying to help their people improve their birth rate, there's been little or no success to date. Okay. There's also another problem that is harder to say that we are actively choosing, is that it seems that male fertility is decreasing. In 2023, there was a paper that went and did a meta-analysis. It gathered 223 other research papers that had been published in the scientific literature. And, they came from around the world and from different times, from the 70s up to 2018. And each of these papers had used different experimental, sometimes a lot different, sometimes slightly different experimental procedures to analyze the number of sperm cells that a man produced during each sexual act. Okay, and then looking at the trends in these 233 different papers and the reports that they gave, this meta-analysis deduced that worldwide, from 1973 to 2018, the number of sperm cells produced by a man during a single sexual act had divided by 2. So men are just producing less sperm cells for some reason. That's 45 years later. Now this is because it's based on many studies, which proves in different places and with different procedures for doing the study. This paper is up for debate. Okay, so it could be that this is a figment of statistical analysis. In any case, it may well be real that men are just producing less sperm than they used to. But then let's go a step further and let's see why it might be that men are producing less sperm. And there's a myriad causes of reduced sperm count. Okay, and I'll list just a few, but you can go on for pages and pages. Oxidants, consumption of oxidants, pesticides, cadmium, other elements, different things that get mixed into many plastics, such as BPA and phthalates. There's air pollution, alcohol consumption, sexually transmitted diseases, there's obesity, there's lack of sleep, and you can go on. Okay, and with these, as with any case where you have hundreds of causes, you just arrive confused at why the sperm count is going down. Okay. I should say a word about in vitro fertilization, IVF, where you extract eggs from a woman and you extract, you get a man to give some sperm, and then you mix them up and maybe you select out certain eggs, but in general you take 4 or 5 eggs at a time and you fertilize them all, and then you put some of them, but not all of them, back in the woman, or in some women, and hope that they take. Now, this is an expensive procedure. The normal way of getting somebody pregnant costs no money at all, and in no time, and can be done, very naturally. And instead, IVF is rather expensive. It requires all sorts of intervention. And it's for a very small, rich, self-focused subset of the human race. Okay, and it tends to work poorly after age 30. If a woman after age 30 uh, tries IVF often enough, she can spend a huge amount of money and get no pregnancies. Um, uh, so with it being for a small, rich section of the human race, one that isn't really that interested in and has its own priorities, and sort of children are an add-on to their priorities. You can't expect this to make a big change or much of a change at all to the human race's fertility. Um, and then there are problems that severe problems with it itself. Okay, it's I strongly oppose IVF. One is that you many eggs are fertilized at once, and you do put a few back in the woman. So often nowadays you have twins, triplets, quadruplets, because in some cases all of them take, okay, all of them implant, and so you get many children at once. But in general, there are quite a few other eggs that are fertilized and are not implanted, and those eggs are kept in a freezer somewhere, and in general eventually thrown out. So you have fertilized eggs, living human beings who are first frozen and then killed. So this is abortion multiplied, and we see a caricature of this where you have a woman named Nadia Suleiman who was aware of this and decided at some point to just take all of the eggs out of the freezer and implant them all at once, and she had 8 children in one go, and no man. So that was one way of confronting the challenge. Okay, but it was absurd. But the challenge itself is tragic. Okay. It also IVF dissolves families, and not having families is a part of why the human race is not so interested in having children anymore. For instance, there's another caricature. There's a man in the Netherlands who has fathered 550 children at least, okay, by offering his sperm to 550 different women. They weren't aware of this. And I've heard that something similar was going on in the United States, and probably it's happening in many other places. And a third problem is that humans, when we select mates, when women select who to mate with, and when we and the whole process of the sexual act itself, and the whole process, it selects out certain genes and selects for other genes. Okay, and when we intervene in that and replace these things, so that then we short-circuit the genetic replacement, the genetic selection that has been key to the continued health of the human bloodline, of our genes, and so we're allowing certain genes that otherwise would not be permitted to continue to stay in our gene pool, and overall our health is going to decrease in proportion to, and our fertility is going to decrease in proportion to our continued use of IVF. To sum up all of these causes, you can just say that most of us are not making the necessary choices to have children, to replace ourselves. We have children at our own convenience or not at all, and our societies are not fully committed to reproducing themselves. That's the bottom line. We just aren't individually and as societies fully committed. Okay. Now, going back over this list, in summary, we can say that there have been many massive disruptions of our fertility and of everything related to fertility, for instance, marriage, or some having a notion of male and female, okay, and 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 all of these disruptions have occurred at more or less the same time in the last couple centuries, and it's kind of a perfect storm. And we've embraced and pushed many of these disruptions as hard as we can. You know, delaying marriage, favoring divorces, no-fault divorce, and sleeping around, and things that certainly will cause STDs and so on. So there are so many of them, and it's a fact that even if we could end one of them, suppose that we could, for instance, worldwide end abortion, or if we could convince most people to marry at age 18, okay, in one way or another, this is a thought experiment, okay, or any other specific thing that we might convince people to do, the fact is that these changes, individual changes, wouldn't fit. They would be resented and they would be resisted, okay, they wouldn't last long. It would be like the United States Prohibition, where alcohol use was outlawed for some years, and just basically the American population didn't go along with it, okay, and turned it into a mockery of what it was intended to be, okay. So, and in any case, any one of these changes would be a drop in the bucket. There's no one reason, one thing, abortion or artificial contraception, or late marriages. Probably, my guess is that the single biggest thing is the fact that we delay our marriages and have other priorities. But you know, none of them is more than a fraction of the total. And so you make one of them, you know, which would be a Pyrrhic victory for as long as it lasted, and even then it wouldn't bump your birth rate up much. Okay. So what's the real reason? Okay. And now we're getting to the main point of this episode, finally. Okay. What's the real reason why we fail to reproduce? Okay. The fact is that we're sick. Individually and as a race, we are ailing, okay? And this is obvious. You take any species that's unwilling or unable to reproduce, okay, and as soon as you see that it's unwilling or unable to reproduce, you can know that it's sick, okay? You see colonies of honeybees that should be feeding the queen, and then just go flying off into the ether and disappear, and you know that this colony just was sick in some sense. You may not know what the sickness was. You may scratch your head for a long time about it, but obviously something was drastically wrong with that colony. Okay. I know some people disagree. They say, okay, well, if the human race, or if I in particular decide that the human race is a problem and it would be better for us to not be around anymore, or if I decide whatever I like, and I just decide, if we decide we don't want to have any more children, then we get to decide, and that's morally right. We get to decide what's right and wrong, and I just disagree. Okay. If you see if you see a living species that's not reproducing when it could, okay, that species has something wrong with it. And it applies to us just as much as to any other species. So what kind of sickness is this? Well, I've listed, you know, some of it might be a decreasing sperm count, but most of it is our decisions. Just thousands and millions of decisions made by billions of people, and by whole societies, and by churches, and by schools, and whatever. Okay, the press, influencing all sorts of things that we do and we talk about. Okay, the human will, is what makes the decisions. It's a sickness of the human will. Okay, we could also talk about the human heart, and not in the sense of whatever is the center of feelings, but in the traditional sense of the human heart. Or you could talk about the human spirit. But I'll just stick with will mostly. Our will is sick somehow. Something's gone wrong with the faculty of the human person that makes decisions. Okay, and we've just lost the will to live. More than half of the world has lost its will to live. Okay. Now, if you've been following this episode, this shouldn't be anything new to you. Okay. In episode 43, I think it was about that the human race has a death wish. Okay, we consciously or unconsciously, to more or lesser extent, some of us really think clearly, I want to kill or I want to die. Other people less clearly or less consciously. Some people completely denying it. But part of our thoughts, our impulses, and our heart and our will is wishing the death of ourselves, of our children, and of others, and it results in all sorts of things. The human race has always had a death wish. We've always, at least throughout recorded history, I don't know about before that, where, according to Christian and Jewish tradition, it wasn't always that way, but for all of recorded history, we've had a death wish where we wished ill for ourselves and for others. Okay, it's always there, but now it's dominant. Okay, and in the recent century, we've had I think the four horsemen of this death wish is the nuclear machine that we've built, which could kill 2 or 3 billion people in a day. It's the murder of 2 billion babies in abortion. The second horseman, which amounts to child sacrifice. We're back to the pattern that some religions have followed throughout human history, where they deliberately sacrificed babies to gods. And the only thing different here is that we deny that there's any God. Okay. That we're sacrificing to. But in fact, whatever the reason is for the abortion, that's practically speaking the God. Okay. The third horseman would be what we've done to the biosphere recently. The fact that we've replaced all the animals with spines, so that our cattle and ourselves put together, our body weight of our poultry, our cattle, ourselves, is something like 20 times the body weight of every other living species with spines. And in fact, we're only a factor of 4 away from replacing every species that's larger than a single cell, to having equal body weight to every species, every land species. I'm talking about land species here, not water species, that's larger than a single cell. Okay, so I think that this, it's one thing to make changes to the environment. It's another thing to entirely replace the environment. Okay, and the fourth one is what we've been discussing. The fourth horseman is a failure to reproduce. Okay, those are immense manifestations of our death wish. There are other smaller ones. You could, of course, add World War II and World War I. I don't put it up there because it's maybe it belongs in the top 4. It would be top 5 then. Just World War II killed only 100 million of us, and the things we're doing now are far beyond 100 million. Then there's addictions, there's obesity, there's suicide, there's euthanasia, there's eugenics, and there's you can go on at some length about ways that we exhibit a death wish. Okay, but then you ask, we always had a death wish. Why is it so much worse right now? Okay, and the fact is, when did it start being worse and why? And I think one clue is that the rich countries began decreasing their they got on this trajectory, this path towards not reproducing already by 1800. Okay, which was, and those countries were experiencing already the glut of resources and the doublings of consumption. So I think it has something to do with our doublings and with our overconsumption. And then around the world, there was, from 1970 onwards, there was the birth rate plummeted. Okay, and I think it's significant to realize that around 1970 was the time that our consumption of coal, oil, and gas, of energy sources, of those energy sources, surpassed our consumption of calories from food, fodder, and wood. Okay, so that was the moment when we were no longer using other energy sources as a supplement to food, fodder, and wood. Okay, when we, I'm talking about averaging over the human race. Already, the rich countries had made that move, and they were already, their birth rates were already plummeting. But in 1970, the world as a whole made that step where it was using other energy sources not as a supplement but as the main energy source, and food, fodder, and wood became increasingly irrelevant. So we stepped. It was a crucial moment of stepping away from the biosphere, from our original way of living. So I think that our death wish is much worse now because of the burden that we're under. Okay, we're staggering and collapsing under the burden. Okay, the first part of it is that we're further away from the biosphere than ever, and we're just choosing our, if you know, as I've argued in previous episodes, that every change that we make to our way of living has strong consequences, which I call poisons. Then you know that you have to choose your poisons wisely. You'll choose a little bit of that and a little bit of another. Okay, you don't go for broke with every single one. And we have a glut of energy and resources. That's our burden. Give humans too much energy, too many resources, and you take them too far away from the biosphere. Apparently, the result is, and we can verify it, we are verifying it now, the result is that we stop having children. So our death wish, as far as I can tell, will never go away, but there's a way to hold it in abeyance, okay, to reduce it so that we are actually able to reproduce and flourish, okay. And I think the way is to go back to an arrangement where we get at least a half of our energy and resources from the biosphere, okay, not from coal, oil, and gas, and not from renewables, and all the other energy sources will be supplementary, okay. Another part of it will be consuming less and more sober about it, okay, and to be selective and thoughtful about the burdens we do take on, okay. If we keep going along the path that we've been pursuing, we'll just die out, okay. But if we take these steps, a step back to the biosphere and to a bit less energy consumption, then we can possibly reduce to return to reproducing ourselves, okay. In fact, the odds are that we will. The human race was consistent about being able to reproduce itself for millions of years, otherwise we wouldn't be here today. Through all sorts of vicissitudes and problems and so on, we kept reproducing. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to return to that. It's built in. Okay, I'll be expanding on these themes a lot in the coming throughout the rest of it. In fact, this channel is about how to flourish and thrive and reproduce. Okay, so this will be a continual theme. of taking steps back to the biosphere into a little less consumption so that we can reproduce ourselves and the people who take those steps will reproduce themselves. The people who don't will die out. Okay. So if you want you and your family line to thrive, you'll take some steps. And I'll be expanding on this in the next episodes. In the meantime, I wish you a great week. The next episode will be summarizing this section of the channel. It'll be about where we stand today. I wish you a good week. If you know anybody who might be interested in this content, please invite them to join in and have a I'll keep coming back. Yeah, keep coming back. Okay.